What was the worst lie told in World War One? Let's find out. Hey, how's it going everyone? It's me, Liam, aka Mr. Knight, aka DystopiaJunkie, and today I'm back with another GCSE poetry analysis video. As I'm sure you can see, this video will be for Wilfred Owen's poem Dulce et Decorum Est, which is on page 18 of your beloved WJEC Eduqas poetry anthology. Before we get properly started, I recommend that you have your anthology out and open to page 18, a pen for making notes, at least 3 different highlighters, and some extra paper too, just in case you run out of note space. Right, so if you've watched any of my other videos in this series, you should know the drill by now. If somehow you've not watched any of those videos yet, then a link to the playlist that they all appear in should be appearing on screen about now. So how about you click it and go through all of the poems in the anthology. Okay, so in this video I will read the poem, go through its context, provide a close reading, consider the poem's meaning, mood and the poet's motivation, think about themes, and then finally at the end of the video, because I'm super nice like that, there will be an optional revision task for you to complete. If this video helps you with your GCSE revision, then please do consider dropping it a like and subscribing to my channel, DystopiaJunkie. That way, all upcoming revision content will end up in your subscription feed. Turn on that notification bell and you'll even receive a notification whenever I drop a new video too. Okay, so generic cringy YouTuber self-promotion aside, here is the poem. Make sure you follow along either on screen or on your anthology. Dulce et Decorum Est. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil's sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. So there's the poem. Let's dive straight into the poem's context. You know why it's important by now. So Wilfred Owen enlisted to fight in World War I in 1915 when he was 18 years old. He was, at least initially, critical of his fellow troops due to their poor behaviour. He did in fact call them expressionless lumps in a letter that he wrote to his mother. In 1916, Owen fell into a shell hole he suffered concussion and was blown up by a trench mortar. He spent several days lying amongst the remains of his fellow officers. He was diagnosed with shell shock, which has symptoms that include fatigue, confusion, nightmares, and impaired sight and hearing. He was sent to Edinburgh for treatment, and there he met Siegfried Sassoon, who is another influential World War I soldier poet. They became friends, and Sassoon influenced Owen's writing. In July of 1918, Wilfred Owen decided to serve in France. Now, this was partially influenced by the fact that he had found out that Sassoon had been shot in the head and was put on sick leave for the rest of the war. Additionally, Owen also saw it as his duty to add his voice to Sassoon's and tell the harsh reality of World War I warfare. Now, in August 1918, Wilfred Owen was awarded the Military Cross for his bravery and leadership. He desperately wanted that award so that he could prove that he was a war poet. Now, sadly, Wilfred Owen died in battle a week before World War I ended, and subsequently all of his writing was published after he died. Now, it's important to know that propaganda abounded during World War I, and a good example of that is Jesse Pope's Who's for the Game. Owen was writing in direct opposition to this, and indeed a first draft of the poem is dedicated to Jesse Pope. Now, he was writing in direct opposition to propaganda as he wanted to show people the true terror of war, hoping that it would no longer be glorified. Chlorine gas was a popular weapon used in World War I. It is a distinctive green shade, and when inhaled it causes extreme difficulty of breathing and eventually, often quickly, death. Gas masks had to be used. The title of the poem is a shortened version of Dulce et Decorum Est pro patria mori, which means it is sweet and proper to die for one's country, roughly. These lines are actually taken from the Roman poet Horace and were well known and uttered amongst pro-war supporters. So I thought it would be useful, especially for those of you who are aiming to get the top grades in your English literature GCSE, to have a quick look at Jesse Pope's poem, Who's for the Game. Now, don't worry, I won't be going over it in massive detail, but understanding exactly what Owen was writing against will give you a more secure understanding of the poem's context. So Who's for the Game is a propaganda poem. It was written with a political aim in mind. It was published by the Daily Mail early on in World War I. In my research, I couldn't find an exact date, but it seems to have been published by 1916 at the latest. Early enough in the war to perhaps encourage people to enlist, but not too early to be naive about what war was really like. Who's for the Game was written with the aim of encouraging men to enlist. The rhetorical questions have the effect of pressuring the reader, as does the false bandwagon. Pope suggests that everybody else will fight in war, and that if you don't, you'll be missing out. The harsh realities of war are ignored in Who's for the Game, and instead an idealised depiction has been given. War is compared to a game. This could be an example of an old lie told with such high zest. Owen probably wrote Dulce in 1917 when he was in military hospital. As I said, an early draft of Dulce was dedicated to Pope, and in a later draft it was dedicated to a certain poetess. But that didn't last either, as Owen wanted to address pro-war sentiment generally, rather than just Jessie Pope. Okay, so I think that's enough context. Hopefully, knowing a bit about Pope's writing has given you a better understanding of exactly what Owen was trying to do in his poem. Okay, so now that we've read the poem and considered its context in quite a lot of detail, we can begin to analyse the poem. Now is your chance to grab those highlighters and to set up your own key, using one colour for imagery, one for language, and another for structure. If you've watched any of my other poetry analysis videos, you should know by now that I always think it's useful to analyse a poem's title. There's a number of reasons, but the most helpful for you is that you will be given all of the titles of the anthology poems in your exam, and so you are given a quotation to write about. So there is my question for this title. Have a read, have a think, make some notes. Right, so we would probably expect a poem with this title to be patriotic and pro-war, since Dulce Decorum Est pro patria mori was used by pro-war supporters back home. However, and we know this because we've read the poem and know some of Owen's background, Wilfred Owen subverts these expectations. This poem sounds like it will be pro-war, but it is anything but pro-war. The pro-war phrase is being used in an ironic way, which Owen can do since he had first-hand experience of the horrors of war. So here is the poem's first stanza. There's loads of different things worth considering about it. In fact, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions that I want you to think about when making your annotations. If you want to make your own annotations first before seeing my ideas, now is the best time to pause the video. The similes emphasise how broken and weak war has left the soldiers, because they are young men who have been compared to old beggars and hags, which are typically old women. Opening the poem with these images immediately expresses a negative or realistic view of war, far from the idealised visions of war set out by pro-war propaganda. Enjambment is used between the 3rd and 4th lines and the 5th and 6th lines. That means that these lines continue without a break, and they seem longer, especially when read out loud. This mirrors the long journey that the soldiers feel is ahead of them, especially as they are tired. Bloodshod suggests that the soldiers' feet are bloody, since shod essentially means shoed. Some of the soldiers are wearing shoes made out of their own dried blood. Lovely. This emphasises just how brutal war is. It's impossible to drop something softly, and so dropping softly is an oxymoron that highlights how exhausted the soldiers are. They are so tired that the world around them no longer makes any sense. Because the soldiers are exhausted, their journey is likely to have no regular rhythm. They may slow down or stop due to fatigue. This inconsistent pace is reflected in the poem's use of caesura, which breaks up and slows down the poem's rhythm. So the words and phrases that I've now just highlighted are things that I think contribute to a semantic field of exhaustion. Owen has used this to reject the traditional images of heroism found in war poetry in order to show a more realistic depiction of war. I would hope that many of my choices make sense, but I would like to explain curse quickly. When you are tired and forced to move, you probably grumble and moan and maybe even swear about it. That's what I think the soldiers are doing, hence my inclusion of it. You could even argue that lame, blind and deaf create the impression of extreme injury or disability. And here we have the poem's second stanza. It's slightly smaller than the previous one, but it is still very analytically rich. There are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions this time. So have a read of those questions, have a think about them, and have a go at making your own annotations. And of course, feel free to share them down in the comment section below. Nice and simple, this one. The repetition of gas, especially in such close proximity, creates a sense of urgency. The 3 exclamation marks also highlight a sense of panic, compounding the effect of the repetition of gas. Fumbling, floundering, and stumbling all help to convey the idea that the soldiers were unprepared for the gas attack. This rejects the traditional image of wartime heroism, where soldiers are usually shown to be able to cope with any situation in a cool, calm, and collected way. By personifying the helmets as clumsy, Owen has used them to reflect their owners, the soldiers. This personification reinforces the idea that the soldiers were not expecting the gas attack, and so this is another way of Wilfred Owen rejecting traditional images of wartime heroism. The triadic structure of similes, remember that triadic structure is just the same thing as tricolon or a list of 3, amplifies the sense of suffering experienced by the soldier who did not put on his gas mask in time. Being on fire, suffering a chemical burn, and drowning are all horrific ways to die, and come with, I imagine at least, a great deal of excruciating pain. Using 3 different comparisons means that anyone reading this poem should have an idea of the suffering that the soldier is going through, as most people would have experienced near drowning, burning themselves on a fire, or maybe having a chemical burn. Here we have the poem's third stanza. Despite it being so much shorter than the others, we can still say quite a bit about it. So in fact we have 1, 2, 3, 4 questions. Pause the video and make some of your own annotations. I'm sorry to say that this is where part 1 of my analysis of Dulce et Decorum Est ends. I didn't want to make a really massive long video for you, so I'm splitting it up into 2 instead. If you do want answers to those questions that were on screen just a moment ago, you're going to have to wait for part 2 to drop, which should be pretty soon. To make sure you don't miss it though, how about you subscribe to my channel and turn on that notification bell, that way you definitely can't miss it. Anyway, in the meantime, I hope you have an awesome rest of the day, and thank you once again for watching this video. Cheers!